All right, welcome to the second edition of Before the Battle. My name is Nick Baldwin. I am the owner of MMAJunior.co, and as always, joining me on the panel tonight is the man behind the bestfightpicks.com, uh, also the Best Fight Picks Twitter account, and MMA Thought. Please welcome Daniel Levy. Daniel, how's it going?
It's going well, Nick. Happy to be on here.
For sure. And Go Palo, he is a feature writer over at Vendetta Fighter. He usually joins us, obviously, for our first episode. He was on the panel, but he was unable to join today. So it is just me and Daniel previewing UFC and Bellator. So you get 2-for-1 in this UFC roundtable. Should be a good time. All right, so let's just quickly go back to last weekend, a UFC pay-per-view card, UFC 188. The UFC's return to Mexico City. In the main event, we finally saw Cain Velasquez take on Fabricio Verdun to unify the heavyweight championship, and Verdun pulled off that upset. I know Palo actually, I think he betted Verdun via submission, so he cashed a little bit there, but it was a great fight. In the main event, obviously, Verdun picked up that third-round submission win, which was a big surprise to many. So, Daniel, let's just get your thoughts on the main event.
It was absolutely incredible. You really saw the evolution of Fabricio Verdun's game. All the work he's been putting in with Master Rafael Cordero, it really came into fruition for his UFC title fight. He goes in there, he's setting up his jab real effectively, he's landing those big kicks, and, he hurt Cain Velasquez with a couple knees to the face. Eventually, Cain Velasquez had enough of the stand-up. He shot in for a desperate takedown, and he got choked out with Fabricio Verdun's championship-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
And what are your thoughts on the altitude? Obviously, Mexico City has a very high altitude, and Cain Velasquez, I just don't think, spent enough time out in Mexico. Obviously, trains out of California, out of American Kickboxing Academy, and he just was not used to the altitude as much as Verdun was, and that really did show in not just the main event, but throughout the card. There was several guys that just did not look the same. So how big of an effect did the altitude play, do you think, on last Saturday?
The altitude obviously plays a big part, so the fighters need to act accordingly and move their training camps over to Mexico early enough in advance to get acclimated to the altitude. And, I really think that Cain Velasquez made a mental mistake, not just underestimating Fabricio Verdun. You heard the comments that his coach said that the longer it goes, the more he would destroy Verdun, and obviously that didn't happen. But he also underestimated the altitude. Verdun went out there about 2 months in advance, and Cain Velasquez only went out there 1 month in advance. So, in my opinion, that was a mental mistake, and it cost him the belt.
Completely. And do you think Cain Velasquez will be back as the champion? Do you think he'll ever regain his UFC title in the future?
That's tough to say, but I definitely think he'll be back contending for a title. I definitely think he'll challenge for the belt. But Fabricio Verdun is a very tough stylistic matchup for him. And now you got all these up-and-coming guys like Stipe Miocic. So the heavyweight title picture just got really interesting.
Definitely. So Dana White actually said that he feels that Junior Dos Santos should be the #1 contender, but he's unable to take the Verdun rematch fight because he is still injured a little bit. So he actually confirmed on a Periscope question and answer session just yesterday, I believe, that it'll either be Stipe Miocic or Andrei Arlovski, where Front Row Brian actually reported that Arlovski got the call, but Dana White shot those rumors down and said it will be either Stipe or the Pitbull getting that UFC call to fight for the title. So let's talk about the co-main event quickly of UFC 188. Obviously, we saw another pretty big upset. Eddie Alvarez picked up that very narrow split decision win over Gilbert Melendez. So, Daniel, what are your thoughts on that fight?
I felt like Gilbert Melendez almost kind of gave the fight away there in the third round. And, in his last couple of fights, like I said last week on the roundtable and even on my podcast, I really don't feel like Gilbert Melendez has looked like the same dominant champion that he was back in Strikeforce. And, the first round, he shut Eddie Alvarez's eye. And then you'd think in the second round he'd come out and tee off on him, but he basically kind of took his foot off the gas pedal and let Eddie Alvarez back into that fight, and Eddie was able to go on and win the second and third round.
So that's it for UFC 1. Actually, no, that's not it for UFC 188. So let's get into our did not play segment. Obviously, we introduced this last week on the first episode. Basically, since Daniel is a bettor, he obviously has his betting website, bestfightpicks.com. Make sure to check it out. But also, I actually started betting beginning last weekend, UFC 188. So I know Daniel doesn't like it, but whatever. So Daniel, what was your did not play? Basically, just a play that cashed big, but was fairly realistic. It wasn't a shock where you don't go and say like Verdun via submission unless for some strange reason you were confident in that. But I don't think anybody could be confident in a Verdun submitting Cain Velasquez. So what was your did not play of the week?
I stated publicly on my podcast that if Fabricio Werdum went north of plus 450, I'd for sure play it for a unit. And it actually peaked out at plus 425. So I ended up not betting it. And I really regret that because, I thought that he had a very good chance of winning. And yeah, that was my mistake for not betting that.
Very interesting. So not submission, but Verdun, just the straight bet. So my did not play of the week was the under 2.5 rounds for Efrain Escudero versus Drew Dober. That was at plus 205, and I was very close to putting at least a unit on that. I actually thought Dober was going to get the mid-fight second round submission, but obviously Escudero pulled off that first round submission under a minute. So that was very crazy, and it would have been lucky for me just because I didn't see Escudero winning, but the under 2.5 would have cashed, and so that's my did not play. So anything else stand out to you on the UFC 188 card, Daniel?
Yeah, Yair Rodriguez, that's a prospect to look out for. I mean, those kicks that kid was landing was absolutely insane. And then when he got taken down to the ground, he's immediately attacking off his back with that triangle choke. So I think with the proper development, this kid could go really far.
I agree, and I actually predicted Charles Rosa in that fight. Both you and Palo predicted Yair Rodriguez. So once again, I was wrong. But as for me, for one thing that stood out to me was something I just mentioned, Efrain Escudero pulling off that, I believe, 56-second submission in the first round. But that, as well as the Patrick Williams submission, both of those, I'm not saying I bet Williams, but I did. But Efrain Escudero and Williams both pulled off sub 1 minute submission wins, and that was the first time there's been a UFC card with 2 submissions that lasted under a minute each since UFC 12. I was not even born. I was like -5 years old when that first happened, so it's pretty crazy stat. But you would think that 2 submissions under a minute would happen a bit more often, but obviously not. So let's get into Bellator 138. We'll just go through the main card. So kicking things off is a bout between Bobby Lashley and Dan Charles. Lashley was supposed to fight actually no. So who do you have, Lashley? Who do you have in this bout between Lashley and Dan Charles?
I'm going to save my in-depth breakdowns for the real fighters, but yeah, I just think there's another hand-picked matchup for Bobby Lashley, and he should probably get the win here.
I agree. He probably will get the stoppage win, but like you said as well, I'm not going to break down this fight. So Daniel Strauss, who recently challenged Patricio Pitbull for the title, who's also on that card, he's fighting Henry Corrales. So who do you like here, Strauss or Corrales?
It's a good fight because Daniel Strauss, this guy, he's a bulldog, man. He'll go in there and he'll just bully you the entire fight. The only issue with him has been that towards the end of some of his fights, he's kind of had a little mental lapse where he'll give up his back, and he's very quick to tap if you latch on even a little bit of a rear naked choke on him. And that cost him the title against Pat Curran and Patricio Pitbull. So yeah, man, as long as Daniel Strauss doesn't have any lapses, he should be able to bully Corrales. But Corrales, he's a really tough, undefeated prospect. So this could be his coming out party, but I'm going to have to lean a little bit towards Daniel Strauss, but there's no bet on this fight. Just enjoy it.
I'm looking at this fight exactly how you are. I am picking Daniel Strauss for the win, but just like you said, Corrales is undefeated, so obviously he has some skill, and I do think he has a chance to take this fight. And like you said, it really could be his coming out party to get really into that top class of Bellator featherweights, really. And so with a win over Strauss, he would just do that. So Michael Chandler is looking to get back into winning ways against Derek Campos. Who do you like here, Chandler or Campos?
At one point, people were calling Michael Chandler the best lightweight that's not in the UFC currently. And he was just destroying everyone he faced. And then once he got into that second fight with Eddie Alvarez, things kind of started to change a little bit. He was taking a little bit more damage than he had in previous fights. And it all culminated with a fight with Will Brooks where, he got tagged with something that didn't even look that hard. And he was out on his feet and he was almost like waving the fight off and calling for a timeout or something like that because he didn't know where he was. And it was very scary to see. And whenever something like that happens to a fighter, you have to question how they're going to come back. I think stylistically he should beat Derek Campos. He's better everywhere. But you got to question where his mindset is now because that was a very scary ending to a fight. So I'm very curious to see Michael Chandler's return here.
I am as well. I am picking Michael Chandler, but I do think Derek Campos has a huge chance to win this fight. Obviously, Chandler is looking to get back into winning ways after a back-to-back Will Brook losses, who is the current champ at lightweight. But Chandler, like you said, he's taken a ton of punishment, and I really do think the Will Brooks losses kind of just, especially the second one, of course, kind of just capped that off, and I don't think he'll ever be the same fighter. And I do think Campos has a huge chance in this fight. I am picking Chandler, but I'm not confident in that pick. And I do think he could actually look fairly bad in this fight. Kind of like I compare him to Pat Curran, like a former champ, a recently former champion, and then they lose their title, and then they kind of just go downhill from there. So we'll see later tonight whether or not he will get back into the winning column. But I do have a 0.5 unit bet on Campos, kind of just because he is a very big underdog in this fight, and I do think he has a relatively good chance of winning this fight. So the co-main event, lots of people, especially the champion who's defending his title in this co-main event, think they should be at the top of this Bellator 138 card. But Patricio Pitbull Freire is set to defend his featherweight belt against Daniel Weichel. Who'd you like to take home the Bellator belt in this fight?
In my opinion, this is the main event of the evening. And, Patricio Pitbull, he's a great champion, and he knows how to battle back from adversity. In that fight with Daniel Strauss, like we were talking about, he got off to a very bad start, and then he showed his championship resolve and his heart, and he was able to get that finish there in the fourth round. So Patricio Pitbull, he is a true champion. He's getting better every single fight. But this is going to be a very tough matchup for him because Daniel Weichel, he's also getting better every single fight. And, he's got some very notable wins on his record. He finished Frodo Hasbulayev. He finished Desmond Green. He beat Pat Curran. So he's been coming through as the underdog consistently here. So if there's one underdog that I think has a chance to come through on this Bellator main card, it is Daniel Weichel. But it's going to be very tough because, like I said, Patricio Pitbull is a true world champion, and he will find a way to get the win. So it's very tough. I'm leaning a little bit towards Pitbull, but as far as a bet's concerned, if you insist on betting it, I do consider this a dog or pass situation. But for me personally, I'm just going to sit back and enjoy this fight.
Exactly. This has to be a dog or pass fight, really, because it is too close to bet on a Pitbull, who is a relatively big favorite. But then if you do want to bet a Daniel Weichel just because of that plus money, then I would say go for it. I am picking Pitbull for the win, but I do think Weichel has a good chance. Like you said, he's been coming up on the win column as the underdog multiple times, especially as of late, obviously, when he fought Curran in his latest outing. And so he's getting the job done at plus money. And tonight could be that night where he shows that he is really the best Bellator featherweight there is. So we'll see what happens. I am picking Pitbull, but I do think it will be a close fight. So any last thoughts on a Bellator?
Yeah, man, the fights with Michael Chandler and Daniel Strauss, And then my opinion, the main event between Daniel Weichel and Patricio Pitbull, they're going to be some very good fights, and I recommend that everyone checks them out.
You have any bets for this Bellator card, or are you saving your bets for the UFC card, which we'll preview in just a minute?
Yeah, I rarely like to bet on Bellator. There's a lot of very controversial decisions there, and a lot of questionable stuff happens in Bellator. So, for me, I just like to sit back and watch it as a fan. So for this specific card, I'm not betting on it. I was considering maybe putting a unit on Daniel Weichel, but Patricio Pitbull, he's such a champion. It's hard to bet against him, so I'm just going to enjoy it. And yes, I am betting on UFC Berlin.
Fair enough. So with that, let's move on to UFC Fight Night 69, also known as UFC Berlin. Started kicking off the main card is a bout between Nick Hein and Lucas Sajewski. Sorry if I'm saying that wrong, but who do you like in this fight, Hein or Sajewski?
I thought it was Sajewski the whole time, man. I heard it's actually Sayevsky. So for everyone, it's Sayevsky. I just found out today. So I've been on the same boat as all you guys. And, it's a good fight. Nick Hein, he's actually a sergeant in Germany. It's not just a cute nickname. He really is Sergeant Nick Hein. And, he's got a good judo background, and he's a solid all-around prospect. He'll throw big punches on the feet. He'll look to take you to the ground. And his 2 fights in the UFC have been very closely contested. I think that Lucas Sayevsky, he's going to probably be a little bit better in the ground game. He actually fought Marcin Held, and, he went through the minefield of leg locks and was able to get that top position over and over and just avoid all the subs. The kid's undefeated. He's only 24 years old, so you can expect big improvements fight by fight. And I think that he's going to most likely win the decision here in his UFC debut. So, yeah, I am going to bet on the underdog here just for 1 unit.
Interesting. So I am actually siding with Nick Hein in this fight. I do think he'll get the job done, and even though he has a 55% decision rate, obviously he mostly goes to decision. I am picking him to stop this fight. I don't know too much about the how do you say it again? Sajewski or something? Whatever. He's making his debut. He is undefeated, so that's very interesting. He could come out and look a lot better than most people expect, but I am siding with the Sergeant in this fight. I do think this will be kind of a showcase fight for him. I think he'll get the job done rather quickly. I'm picking him probably via TKO in the 1st or 2nd round. So moving on from that fight, Peter Sabota is set to take on Stephen Kennedy. Who do you like here, Daniel?
Stephen Kennedy, he's actually won 9 of his last 10 fights, and he's an Australian prospect. I don't know if I want to call him a prospect because he does have a 22-6 record. So in a sense, he's a veteran, but he's getting this step up, this short notice call to the UFC, and he's going against Peter Sabota. And Peter Sabota, he's just going to be a little bit too well-rounded, a little bit better in every single area than Stephen Kennedy. So I'm going to go with the favorite here. I think Peter Sabota, he's either going to submit him or outclass him for a clear decision.
100% agree here again. I like a Sabota. Probably, like you said, either a fairly dominant decision, but I am probably picking him in a late submission win. I think he'll just look better really overall and to get the job done in Berlin. So the co-main event, believe it or not, is a featherweight bout between Dennis Siver and Tatsuya Kawajiri. Obviously, Siver is coming off a TKO loss to Conor McGregor, and Kawajiri hasn't fought since his decision loss to Clay Guida. Siver is number 12 in the featherweight division. Kawajiri is number 15. Who do you like in this matchup?
In my opinion, there's no shame in getting TKO'd by Conor McGregor because I do think that Kawajiri, he would have looked even worse against McGregor than Dennis Siver did. And, Dennis Siver, he's usually a very solid guy, and he wins against almost everyone until he gets that step up in competition. Once he gets that step up, that's typically when he tends to lose. And, he's a very solid kickboxer, throws big looping punches if you get in close, has that signature spinning back kick. And on the ground, he's not half bad either. He has good top control, good wrestling, good takedowns. And Kawajiri, what he looks to do is he's super opportunistic if he gets your back. He'll sink in that choke immediately, and he's really good with his submissions. The issue with him is the way he sets up his takedowns is super sloppy. He'll dive in head first for a takedown and won't even set it up. So I think Dennis Siver is going to see this coming from a mile away, and he should win. Now, a lot of people have been pointing to a recent change in Kawajiri's physique, and he is looking more ripped than ever. But I mean, just because he's looking really ripped doesn't mean that suddenly he's going to have the proper setups for his takedowns, which he's not going to stand and bang with Seaver. He wants to take him to the ground. So I just think, as long as Seaver just doesn't look like an old man or something like that, I think he should get the victory here.
Definitely, I agree with you once again. I am siding with Seaver in this fight. I don't think he'll pull off a stoppage win, but most likely a very dominant decision win. I like him to take home the unanimous decision, 30-27 on all three judges' scorecards, and get another step up in competition, but not Conor McGregor level. Obviously, McGregor is fighting for the title, but obviously we saw Seaver isn't a top 5 featherweight, but I don't think he's a guy that will lose to Kawajiri tonight or tomorrow. So the main event of the evening, UFC strawweight title holder, strawweight bantam, UFC strawweight title holder Joanna Jędrzejczyk is set to defend her belt for the first time against Jessica Penne. Who do you like in this fight? The big favorite, Jędrzejczyk, or the big underdog, Penne?
I am an underdog kind of guy, but I got to go with the champion here. I just think the champion is better everywhere. And what's going to go down here is that, she's gonna tag Jessica Penne on the feet a little bit. Penne is going to try to shoot in for some sloppy takedowns. And, maybe in the first 30 seconds or the first 2 minutes, Jessica Penne is able to get Joanna Jędrzejczyk down to the ground. But I think Jędrzejczyk, she's been working her stand-ups. She's been working her takedown defense. She's going to be able to get the fight back up to the feet like she did in her last fight. And she's going to be able to tee off on Jessica Penne. So I'm actually looking at a bet on the under here. Last time I checked, it was plus 130 for the under 2.5 rounds. And I'm thinking about only putting a unit on it. I do think that Joanna Jędrzejczyk gets the finish here.
I also like Jędrzejczyk via TKO. I'm going with a 3rd round stoppage. I do think Penne, her best bet, of course, is getting Joanna Jędrzejczyk down to the ground. But do I think that'll happen? I don't think so. And if it does, if Penne is able to get that takedown, I think Joanna will be up very quickly. Obviously, Carla Esparza attempted to take Joanna down when she lost to Joanna for the title back in March. And I think the stat was crazy. It was something like out of 17 takedown attempts, she got her down like 1 or 2 times. So obviously, Jędrzejczyk's takedown defense is spectacular. And if Carla Esparza can't take her down at will, there's no way Jessica Penne will. And but we'll see what happens. I do think Joanna Jędrzejczyk will light her up on the feet because that's basically where it will be for the entire fight as long as it lasts. I do think it will be under 15 minutes long. So anything else stands out to you on this card? Anything else you want to talk about on the preliminary card before we get into a few bets we're both making?
Yeah, Alan Patrick versus Mairbek Taisumov. That's a really intriguing fight because, Taisumov, he's been looking better than ever. And, his stand-up, he trains at Tiger Muay Thai. And the only issue with him has been his ground game. And now he gets to go in there against Alan Patrick, who, on the feet, he does throw those big capoeira techniques. But on the ground, he's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt that trains with Jacare every single day. So this is a really intriguing matchup for me. I'm going to take the underdog in Patrick, but I'm super stoked to check it out.
Are you betting on Alan Patrick in this fight, or is it a pass for you?
Yeah, I'm going to take 1 unit on Alan Patrick at plus 150.
Interesting. So one fight I actually want to talk about is Makwan Amirkhani versus Mazzio Fulin. I know you're not as high as some people are on Mr. Finland. Of course, we didn't really see him too much in his debut. He had got like a 8-second knockout win over Andy Ogle. So I know I heard you when you were co-hosting Flying with Best Fight Picks earlier this week. I heard you say that he's more of a submission guy than a knockout guy. But most people think now, just because of his debut, he's a big knockout with great hands type of guy. But so how do you see this fight going down? Do you think Makwan Amirkhani will get the job done on the feet or on the ground, or do you think Fulin will pull off that upset?
Makwan Amirkhani, everyone does act like he's this knockout artist, but the only knockout on his entire mixed martial arts record was when he debuted against Andy Ogle, and he just ran across the cage and, basically pulled a Jose Aldo versus Cub Swanson with a couple extra follow-up punches. And, you know, the guy's not a knockout artist at all. Let me just tell you that right now. He's a wrestler, and, you know, his wrestling isn't the best either. He's no D1 All-American or Olympic wrestler or anything like that. He doesn't have the wrestling credentials. He's a Finnish champion, and, you know, all respect to Finland. It's a great country, but they're not known for their wrestling. And, you know, Makwan Amirkhani, when he steps up in competition, he's going to really get exposed. You know, even when he stepped up, quote unquote, in competition in some of his regional fights, he got exposed. And, you know, his ground game just isn't very good. If you know what you're doing, you can stuff his takedowns and you can reverse him. I'm just not 100% convinced that Masio Fulin is going to know what he's doing here. But Masio Fulin, what he does bring to the table is some very solid hands, some good takedown defense. The only issue with him is his chin, man. You know, Leandro Morales knocked him out with a head kick on The Ultimate Fighter. And then in Masio Fulin's UFC debut against Torres, you know, he got dropped twice in the second round, but he showed that heart that he has, and he was able to battle back and win the second and third round. So maybe Amirkhani can get his second knockout on his record here and come in there and just knock out Fulin. But if Fulin's able to stuff some of these takedowns and land his hands, he can for sure get the upset. It's a toss-up, in my opinion.
So you're not betting on it or anything? You're not putting Amirkhani in any parlays or anything like that? Are you betting Fulin?
I'm absolutely not going to bet on Amirkhani whatsoever, but I may take a one-unit shot on the dog, but it has to be more than plus 195 where it currently sits for me to take that stab, at least plus 250.
Fair enough. So overall thoughts on the card. Obviously, it's a UFC Fight Pass exclusive card, and it's pretty strange to me, at least. Obviously, it'll attract some viewers, but for a champion to be headlining a Fight Pass card, I don't think that looks the best, not just for the UFC, but for the champ. Of course, it's the brand new division. There's only been 2 title fights in the entire UFC strawweight division, but at least make it co-headline like a pay-per-view or even headline a Fox card. Like, I don't know. What are your thoughts on Joanna Jędrzejczyk headlining a UFC Fight Pass card?
You know, I actually disagree with you here. And she did headline a co-headline a pay-per-view her last fight, but now she gets to be the first ever title fight in UFC Fight Pass history. So that's really big for Fight Pass. And for me personally, I'm actually very excited about the card. I know there's not a lot of big names on paper, but I'm really into seeing who are the prospects of tomorrow, the next generation. And, you know, I looked into this card and there's a lot of really good prospects on here. You know, we already talked about Alan Patrick versus Merabek Taisumov. You got Nicholas Backstrom versus Noad Lahat. We got Lucas Sayevsky, who's the undefeated prospect coming in to battle Nick Hine in Nick Hine's home country. We got the title fight with Jessica Penne. You know, veterans such as Dennis Seaver and Kawajiri, prospects like Scott Askham and Magomed Mustafayev. I'm pumped, dude.
Overall, it is not the best card on paper, but I do think it will end up being fairly good fights. Obviously, you just named off a bunch. There's a lot of good prospects on this card, and as well as your fair share of veterans. And then, of course, the title fight that we all want to see. I do think Joanna will probably dominate the fight, but never know what happens. It's mixed martial arts. So let's get into very quickly our bets. So what are some things that you're playing for tomorrow's UFC card?
Well, we actually haven't released any plays yet on best fight picks, but what we're looking to do is just do one-unit shots on Noad Lahat, Alan Patrick, Lucas Sayevsky, and the under in the main event between Jędrzejczyk and Penne.
Very interesting. So I'll quickly go through a couple of mine. I'm actually also playing Noad Lahat. I'm putting a 0.5 unit bet on him, just a straight bet. I'm also betting Magomed Mustafayev at plus 100. I didn't like that price too much, but that's why I only put a little bit on that. And one parlay I actually really like. I do think, obviously, like I said earlier when we were breaking this fight down, Nick Hine doesn't get tons of stoppages, but I do like him to get the win inside the distance. So I actually parlayed him via inside the distance with Amirkhani inside the distance. And that's a big, big payout. So I put 2 units on that to add a plus 800 or so. So that'll be interesting to see if that cashes. And then I just put a couple favorites together. Also, Amirkhani, you can tell I'm pretty confident in Mr. Finland to get it done tomorrow night. I parlayed him with Seaver and Jacek at a 3 unit. So I'm pretty confident in both of those parlays, but anything can happen. So we'll see how it goes. But Patrick Williams, that's still going to be my big bet of the century, especially just with you and Go Palo, who are saying not to bet that, but we'll see. So anything else you want to talk about?
Yeah, it's up to you. You know, I'm super pumped. I'm always happy to see live fight cards. And, you know, we got Bellator tonight. We got UFC tomorrow. Next week, we got Machida versus Romero. And then after that, we got Conor McGregor versus Jose Aldo. So basically, we got fights coming up all the time. And, you know, there's never been a better time to be a UFC fan.
For sure. It's a great schedule. So, Daniel, with that, where can we find all of your picks, all of your Twitter accounts? You have multiple. And where can we just find you on the World Wide Web?
Okay, so you can go to bestfightpicks.com, and if you enter your email in the top right, I'll send you all the best fight picks for free every single week on Fight Week. That's how we do it. So bestfightpicks.com. You can follow me on @bestfightpicks on Twitter or @MMA Thought, and I'm always down to chat with everyone.
And as for me, check me out on Twitter @NickUFC. Make sure to head over to my website, MMAjunior.co. I will have lots of coverage for tomorrow's UFC card. I'm not going to be covering this Bellator card. We're only covering UFC and BAMMA right now. Might be getting into Cage Warriors. I did hear they're planning another card very shortly. Obviously, Cage Warriors, they've been kind of just inactive since November and nothing's been scheduled. But I am hearing that they will have a card in the near future, probably around summertime or a bit after. But so that'll be interesting. Check out my podcast, MMA Junior Radio. You can find that at MMAJuniorRadio.com. This Wednesday's episode, we had Sean O'Connell on the show, obviously UFC light heavyweight. He talked about, he actually just got back from a trip in Africa. So he talked about his book. He talked about traveling, a bunch more. So check that interview out. My co-host John King had Shay Walsh on the episode. He was a BAMMA 21 winner. Obviously, that was just last weekend when UFC 188 took place. So good interview there. Talked about his fight, what's next for him. And then closing out the show, I had UFC flyweight John De Los Reyes on the show. He talked about his big win in Manila. Obviously, he picked up that Fight of the Night bonus. He talked about that and his big Fight of the Night win, obviously, but also he's able to train full-time now. So it's really life-changing, $50,000 there. And on next week, we have Ian McCall and Patrick Williams, actually. So 2 interesting interviews there. So check that out. And Daniel, just a couple last words.
Yeah, absolutely. I need to plug the podcast. So everyone, every single fight week, me and Fly and Brian, we do the Flying with Best Fight Picks podcast, and we break down the entire card from start to finish and advise you on which plays to place, and also, you know, for your counter move teams, for your UFC pick'em. So it's really cool. We've been doing it every fight week, and check it out.
And with that, we're out. So enjoy the fights tonight, Bellator, and UFC tomorrow. Adios.